So angle of elevation and angle of depression. Again, remember we are talking about SOHCAHTOA. Who can remind us what SOHCAHTOA stands for? Anybody remember what SOHCAHTOA stands for? What's the S stand for in SOHCAHTOA? Sine. I'm so glad you didn't say sin. Sine. And the O and the H represent what? Opposite over hypotenuse. Okay. Then we had cosine. Ka. And the C stood for what? Cosine. What does the A stand for? Adjacent over hypotenuse. Hypothesis is in science. Sometimes also in English. Okay, and then what was the last one? The last TOA, right? And T stands for, you guys were all saying it? Tangent. And tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay, so we're going to use this again today, and really all this is taking the same rules that we learned on Thursday, whether we're talking about an angle or a side, and we're using it in real-world problems. So this is when a student says, Miriam, when are we ever going to use this in real life? And I say, thank you for asking that. I'm so glad you're interested. This is when we're going to use this in real life. So if you look at this, first thing says angle of elevation. First of all, this is lesson 5.3. And we'll just call this angles of elevation and depression. We're going to do both of them at the same time. When you think of an elevation, what do you think about doing? Going up, right? An elevator goes up. That's the same word, elevator. So when we are talking about an angle of elevation, you guys see that word there. It says, when looking up to an object. So angle of elevation looks up to an object. The angle of elevation is formed by the observer's line of sight and a horizontal line. So anytime we have something where we're looking up, we're talking about this angle over here. That's always going to be our angle of elevation. The line of sight in this diagram is which piece of the triangle? The line of sight is which piece? Good, the hypotenuse, right? This over here would be your hypotenuse. So the hardest thing about this lesson is drawing the picture accurately. All right, and so we're going to practice doing that so that you can get a hang of it. Because once we get everything labeled where it needs to be, then it's the easy stuff of making sure you're using the right trig function or the trig ratio. Okay, so number one, it says Casey sights the top of an 84-foot tall lighthouse. All right, so the first thing we need to know is we need to draw what? What would you draw first? The lighthouse? Okay, so let's draw a lighthouse. And here's my lighthouse. Okay, seriously, I just need you to draw something that represents that, okay? It says the lighthouse is 84 feet tall. So I know that this over here is 84. And Casey sights the top of the lighthouse. So Casey, we assume, is standing on the ground looking up at the lighthouse. So we need to draw Casey on the ground. And Casey is looking up at the lighthouse. And the angle that Casey is looking up at with the line of sight and the horizon is 58. So we know that we have 58 degrees right here. So from here to here is 58 degrees. If Casey is 6 feet tall, how far is he standing from the base of the lighthouse? So if we're talking about the base of the lighthouse and how far is he standing, wouldn't you agree that's this space right here? Okay, so we're going to call this X over here. Now, here's something we have to consider. We have to consider that he's already 6 feet tall. So he's not looking up at 84 feet tall of a lighthouse. How far is he actually looking up if we take into consideration his height?
7.
What did you do to get 78 feet, James?
Subtracted 6 from 84.
If we subtract 6 from 84, if I tell you that this right here is 6 feet, because this is how tall he is, then he's really looking up at 78, isn't he? Does that make sense, guys? So now when I set up my trig ratio, I need to use the 78, not the 84. Okay, so here is our angle, right here. We have this side and we have this side. So what is 78 in this, in regards to opposite, or opposite adjacent? What is 78, Natasha? Opposite. Okay. And then x is going to be the what, Lexi? Adjacent. Okay. So which trig function do I use if I have opposite and adjacent, Katie? Sine uses O and A?
Oh, wait, no.
Look at your little thing that you wrote down.
Tangent.
Tangent. Okay, so we're going to use tangent. So I say tangent of 58 equals opposite over adjacent. And remember, when we use opposite, we're going to use the 78, not the 84, because we have to take into consideration his height. Everyone okay with where I got this equation? Tangent of 58 equals 78 over x.
So far.
Does anyone remember how we get x by itself when x is on the bottom like this? Donald?
You switched
Okay. Donald's reminding us we do the old switcheroo, right? When x is on the bottom only, this is when we do the switcheroo. So let's go ahead and write x equals 78 over tangent 58, and then let's use our calculator. Remember to put it in exactly like this. 78 goes first, then divided by tangent of 58. Please close your parenthesis on the 58. Carla, what did you get for x?
48.7.
Does anyone else get 48.7? Okay, now let's think about this. What if Carla had gotten like 2 feet? Does it make sense that Casey, if he's looking up at a 78-foot tall lighthouse, is only standing 2 feet away? Wouldn't the angle of elevation, if he was only standing 2 feet away right here, wouldn't the angle of elevation be much bigger? You guys see that? So make sense of your answer to make sure it makes sense. And so I would say that 48.7 makes sense. And remember, if it's a story problem, we answer it with a sentence. Who wants to give me your sentence?
Casey is standing 48.7 feet away from the base of the lighthouse.
Perfect. Casey is standing. I'm writing it too, so you can write it. 48.7. Is it feet for sure?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Feet from the base of the lighthouse. Now, it didn't say in our directions, it does say round to the nearest tenth. Okay. So let's make sure we do that. Again, if you do not write a sentence, you will lose points. Because it's one thing to actually get the answer, but I want to make sure you understand the answer that you get. Okay, any questions about that so far? All right, let's try number 2. The angle of elevation from a cooker's foot on the football field to the top of the goalpost bars is 17 degrees. Okay, so let's, before we read any further, we know we have a football field and we have goalposts. It's pretty good if I do say so myself. And we have a kicker that's standing on the ground. And it says from his foot, so now this time it is going to be from the ground. To the top of the goalpost bars is 17 degrees. We're making a right triangle. If he is standing 131 feet from the base of the goalpost, how tall is the goalpost? So where is the 131 going to go?
On the bottom.
On the bottom. And what are we trying to find here, Kara? Where's our x going to go? Is x going to go on the hypotenuse or x going to go on the other side? Because the problem says how tall is the goalpost. I can't hear you. Is this representing the height of the goalpost? Or is this representing the height of the goalpost? The side? Okay, so this is what we're trying to find here, this x. So if I have 17, what is x representing in this diagram, Kyle? Is it opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse?
Opposite.
The x is the opposite. Braxton, what is the 131?
Adjacent.
Adjacent. So Tylea, which trig function are we going to use? Sine, cosine, or tangent? What did you say? Tangent. Perfect. So we have tangent of 17. Remember, the angle always goes with the sine, cosine, or tangent. And we said it's opposite over adjacent. So x over 131. How are we going to get x by itself? Ashley, what are you doing?
We have
131 multiplied on each side. Good. Remember in your calculator, it should be exactly as it is written. 131 times tangent of 17. 40.1. Katie says 40.1. Does anyone agree with that? 40.1. Okay, so our sentence would be, anyone?
The goalpost is 40.1 foot tall.
The goalpost is 40.1 feet tall. Excellent. Monica? So 5 is big enough to change the 0, right? Yeah, we always round to the nearest 10th. Yep. Any questions on number 2? Okay, let's set up number 3. Leah's mom is standing at the bottom of the slide at the playground, waiting for Leah to slide down. If the angle of elevation from the bottom of the slide to the top of the slide is 46 degrees, and the slide has a vertical height of 9 feet, find the length of the slide. If you just read this without trying to dissect it, it does look a little intimidating. Okay, so let's talk about a slide here. I'm just going to draw a slide. But that doesn't leave me much room for her mom. So let's go the other way. Lovely curly slide. I guess it didn't say curly slide. Perfect. Okay. Leah's mom is standing at the bottom of the slide. This is room for interpretation, folks. Here's her mom standing at the bottom of the slide. The angle of elevation from the bottom of the slide to the top. So even though the slide is not, maybe this is the type of slide, but typically slides don't look exactly like that unless they were built in like 1970. So let's just make a line there, okay, to kind of abbreviate a little bit. From the angle of elevation from the bottom of the slide to the top is 46 degrees. So this corner right here is 46 degrees. Guys, if you've noticed, the corners that you're choosing for your angle measurements are always the ones down here. It's never at the top. Okay, that will always be the case. It's never at the top. Okay, let's just go ahead and complete this triangle. The slide has a vertical height of 9. So where should 9 go? The straight, not the diagonal. Height is straight up and down. So over here should be 9. Because here's the thing, guys. If you are thinking that it should be the diagonal, when you stand a diagonal up, isn't it actually taller? right? If you were to stand that diagonal up, it would be taller. So we have to be really careful about that. Okay, and it says find the length of the slide. So now it's asking me for the length of the slide, which is x. Okay, so according to 46, 9 is going to be what, Monique? Is 9 opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? Good, it's the opposite. Brian, what is the x going to be?
Adjacent.
Where's your right angle?
Hypotenuse side.
It's here.
I have no clue.
Is x going to be the hypotenuse, or is it going to be the adjacent?
Um,
What's the definition of a hypotenuse? It's across from what? Okay, we've been doing this for 2 weeks. A hypotenuse is across from the right angle. Remember that? So x is across from the right angle. So x is going to be the hypotenuse. Okay, if I'm using opposite and hypotenuse, Courtney, which trig function am I going to use? Sine. Thank you for not saying sin. Sine of 46 equals 9 over x. All right, you okay with this? We're not going to go ahead and solve it out. You can if you want to, but for the sake of time, you know what you're doing. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the next page, angle of depression. So angle of depression is the same concept as angle of elevation, but it's going to start out just a little bit differently. Okay, so the angle of depression is when you are looking down at something. Okay, so the angle of depression is looking down at something. So if I gave you those two as vocabulary words, angle of elevation and angle of depression, you're looking down at an object. Depression, we think of depression as like a medical condition, but depression is also the word of it is to look down, to be down. And so if you think about someone who's depressed, they're down and out, they're sad, right? So kind of the same thought process there. So here's the thing about the angle of depression. The angle of depression, this line that's dotted over here, is dotted because it's actually added in. And this angle of depression is on top of the right triangle. If you look here, here's my right triangle. And the angle of angle of depression is outside the right triangle. Do you guys see that? It's actually outside the right triangle. And so we get a little bit stuck because we can't go inside the right triangle. Unless we see this. And we're going to see who's going to get extra credit points here. What do you notice about this line and this line? They're parallel. Okay? So if we know that this angle right here is my angle of depression, how could I move inside the triangle? What? I only have one angle right now. So is there another angle that's congruent? Not corresponding. Is there another angle that's congruent to this one?
Yeah.
Say it, Elvis.
I don't know how to say it.
Oh, Natasha? The one at the bottom is congruent because of what? Natasha's got extra credit points. Alternate interior angles. You guys see that? These are alternate interior. Here's that transversal. So anytime they give you an angle of depression outside, you can just automatically flip it and say, we're going to be talking about this one here. Okay? Questions about that? That's why even though it says it's depression, it's really the same thing as elevation. We just have to flip it inside. Okay? So let's look at number 5. It says the lifeguard is sitting on a platform looking down at the swimmer in the water. All right, so they actually drew the picture for us. The lifeguard's line of sight is 8 feet above the ground. So what is 8 feet above? Where is that? Is that your hypotenuse? Is that going to be the bottom or is that going to be the side? His eyesight is 8 feet above the ground. So this right here is going to be 8. He's sitting 8 feet tall above the ground. Okay? He's looking down at the swimmer in the water. The angle of depression is 18. So we know that this up here is 18, but then that means we also know that down here inside the right triangle is 18. And that's what we're really looking at. How far away is the swimmer from the lifeguard? Which side is that going to be? The bottom or the hypotenuse? He's at the top, but isn't the lifeguard really represented by the base right here? So it is going to be this bottom down here. That one is kind of tricky. Okay, so if I have 18 as my angle, what is 8 representing? Monica. Okay, is that your adjacent, your hypotenuse, or opposite?
It's my opposite.
8 is opposite. Excellent. Lexi, what's the x going to be? Adjacent. Okay, so Elvis, which trig function am I going to use if I have opposite and adjacent?
Tangent.
Good. What's your equation going to be, Elvis?
Is it tangent of 18 equals x over 8?
It's opposite over adjacent. So which one's opposite?
8.
8 over x. Remember, guys, you can always do this part where you write your O over A to make sure you don't get it wrong. So x is on the bottom, and when x is on the bottom, what do I do there to get rid of it? Carla?
You change it.
So what's your equation going to look like?
It'll be x equals 8 divided by tangent of 18.
Perfect. Okay, do it. Did you check? Is that what you got? Okay, what are we getting? 24.6. Okay, so we would say the swimmer is 24.6 feet away from the lifeguard. Good. Okay, why don't you try number 6 on your own? Why don't you read it and see if you can set up a picture for number 6. You guys think you got it? Okay, a helicopter spots a landing pad below. If the angle of depression and the horizontal distance to the pad is 1,200 feet. So here's the thing. He's probably not right over the landing pad, right? He's probably looking down at it. And we know we're building a right triangle. Okay. He spots a landing pad below. The angle of depression, remember your angle of depression is really right here, right? This is 73. But we know we actually can go inside and say that this is 73. The horizontal distance means what piece? The bottom, the side, or the hypotenuse? Horizontal means this, right? It says the horizontal distance to the pad is 1,200 feet. What is the altitude? What's another word for altitude? Height. So is that going to be the hypotenuse or the side, Elvis?
The side.
The side is your height. Got to make sure you read carefully. What is the altitude of the helicopter? So now that we have our diagram correct, my angle is 73. So Kara, what is x representing? Is it opposite or adjacent or hypotenuse? Hypotenuse is always across from your right angle. So we have to go,
Yeah, mine's like,
okay, we have to go across. So it's going to be the opposite, adjacent, or hypotenuse? Opposite. Brian, what is 1,200 going to be? Adjacent or hypotenuse? Remember, hypotenuse is across from the right angle. Okay. And Ben, which trig function uses O and A? Sine, cosine, or tangent? Perfect. So we say the tangent of the angle, and so we say tangent of 73 equals our opposite over adjacent. And then how would we get x by itself here, Tylea? So you're multiplying by 1,200? Okay. So 1,200 times tan 73. Courtney, let me know what you get.
I got 3,925.0 or 0.02.
Okay. Did anybody else get 3,925? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And we do need to put 0.0 because that is rounding to the nearest tenth. It's not going to change. So we are going to put the 0.0. So it says the altitude of the helicopter is 3,925.0 feet. Any questions on that? Do we need to do another one, or are you guys okay? Lexi says we're good. Yeah, Elvis?
How do we know if it's sin or tan? Or sine?
So if it was sine, then you would be given the opposite and the hypotenuse, right?
Okay.
So you're always looking the way. That's a great question. It's the one that most students get confused on. How do you know which trig to use? You use sine, cosine, or tangent. It depends on what sides you've been given, right? So if O and H, your only option is sine. If it's O and A, your only option is tangent. So you have to make sure you draw it carefully. The only reason you would have something different than your neighbor is if your drawings don't look the same and you didn't label it the same.
Yeah.
So then you have to talk about that, okay?